New Revolution Institute presents Your Call to Active Citizenship. This is Lesson 5, The Importance of a Christian Worldview, Part 2. This lesson will cover 1. Why does a worldview matter? 2. How does the rule of law relate to worldview? 3. Case studies in worldview, abortion. And then 4. Case studies in worldview, marriage. And then 5. Worldview, the family, the church, and the government. Now here's your teacher, Matt Staver.
So why does a worldview matter? It matters because these are presuppositions on which you make your decisions. As it relates to policies and laws, these presuppositions can have diametrically opposite conclusions based upon differing worldviews.
It is essential for Christians to have a Christian worldview because a Christian worldview helps us to understand that Christianity is relevant in all areas of life, politics, sociology, in not only on Sundays when we go to church, but the Christian worldview has an influence throughout the history of humankind, in medicine, in law, in all areas of life. That's why we need to understand that our faith is relevant in society, our faith is relevant in everything we do.
If you believe that there is a God and there is objective law, then your duty is to apply that law in conformity with this higher natural law or revealed law. But if you believe that there is no God, as in the French Revolution, and therefore the law comes from the people and not from a higher authority, then that law can evolve and change over time. There is no absolute in a worldview that does not believe God.
Well, really, there are two prevailing worldviews. One is a worldview that says there is absolute truth, absolute morality, and the other says that all things are relative. My truth may not be your truth. And that's relativism. We've seen that relativism does not usually end well in relativist regimes like Joseph Stalin's Russia and Mao's China and so forth. Relativism does not end well. We need a Christian worldview to be the prevailing worldview.
Take, for example, the issue of murder. Why is murder wrong? Well, murder may be wrong for a lot of reasons in certain people's minds, but obviously, if God is the creator and infused each one of us with unalienable rights, including the right to life, then you and I, as created human beings, do not have the right to take another person's life. God is the creator and author of life. But on the other hand, if you're looking at an atheistic worldview without the existence of God, why is it wrong to murder? Well, I heard a debate with regards to certain atheists talking about that very thing. The examples that they gave as why it's wrong to murder did not seem to be very consistent. And in fact, they ultimately agreed that Christians or Judeo-Christianity worldviews have the easy or the proper answer to this, if you will, and that it was more difficult for them to articulate why it is wrong to murder. If you have no ultimate absolutes, if laws evolve over time and they come from the individual people, how can you ultimately condemn the Nazi Holocaust? How can you ultimately say it's wrong? How can you say that it was wrong for those people? Now, I know that makes us all recoil. The question you have to ask yourself is, why do you recoil from that thought? It's probably because you're unknowingly operating from a Judeo-Christian worldview. Without the absolute of creation coming from God being the creator, there is no real final answer as to why we should respect the sanctity of human life. All life can be relative. Life, whether it's human beings, can be put on the same level as individual animals and plants. There's no difference. In fact, there's moves right now in this country to elevate the rights of animals and plants to the same status as the rights of human beings. There's an organization, a public interest organization, that promotes the constitutional rights of rocks and trees and animals to have the same constitutional protections as individuals. So they would be put on the exact same level. So there's individuals who do not believe in the sanctity of human life, and it is because of their worldview. Either if you don't believe in the sanctity of human life because there is no God, you can take life, or human life is put on the same level as plants and animals. Worldview does matter in our laws and policies. One specific example of worldview is how it relates to the rule of law, and we'll also talk about abortion and marriage. But worldview as it relates to the rule of law, understanding that there is creation, where God created and ordered our universe. There's the fall, where there's brokenness that enters our universe. And there's redemption, a restoration of our world to the original creation. In this idea of creation, God orders our society. There's rules that operate in the created world. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, we rotate, we have the day and night in our world. The universe is sustained in a way that laws of gravity and the laws of nature control it and operate it, and we can depend upon those laws to operate successfully. But if we ultimately have the issue of the rule of law, how does that differ based upon worldviews? Well, if God is the creator and created certain laws as part of the laws of nature and ordered our society, then there is a rule of law, like there is the law of gravity. We may not like the law of gravity. We would rather be able to fly or jump off of a mountain and be able to soar like an eagle. But irrespective of whether we debate that in the legislature or judges on the United States Supreme Court have an opinion upon it, it's still the laws of gravity. We can't change it. We must operate in conformity to the laws of gravity. In a Judeo-Christian worldview, there is the idea of the rule of law. You see this encapsulated in the Ten Commandments, where God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses to order their lives. That radically affected not only the Israelite nation, but all of Western civilization. But if there is no creator, there is no God in your worldview, then the rule of law just means whatever any individual or judge in power says it is. It can change. It does not have any ultimate authority or higher power. It does not transcend that society or culture. It's simply something that created over time. We see this debate in the idea of the United States Constitution being a so-called living document by those who want to change it through judicial decisions because they don't like what it says. That it was good for the founders, but not the same for us today, so we need to change it. Those are the debates that we have, and they're based upon differing worldviews. Is the Constitution a document that we must respect, that is the rule of law, and can only be changed when the people amend it? Or does it evolve over time, and it has this malleable characteristic? We call one judicial activism and the other judicial restraint. The differences between the two are based upon your worldview. Now, when we look at other issues such as abortion and marriage, the worldview conflicts or issues become even more clear. When we look at abortion, it's a classic conflict of worldviews. Abortion in the United States was ultimately ruled upon by the United States Supreme Court on January 22, 1973. In a decision of 7 justices of the 9, they said that there's a constitutional right to an abortion. Now, obviously, there is no constitutional right to an abortion in the Constitution itself. And it is contrary not only to the Constitution, but it's contrary to the very principles of the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which is the right to life.
When it comes to a Christian worldview in terms of abortion, well, the scripture says, before you were formed, I knew you, and before you came forth, I sanctified and ordained you. So a Christian should understand that life doesn't start in the womb, it starts with God. The reality of destiny starts with conception. Now we know that there's someone there that has a destiny. So as a Christian, we should think that abortion is a no-no.
God says that he hates the shedding of innocent blood. And in our nation, there's been probably over 55 million babies that have been killed. And then plus, we've funded abortions around the world. And it's really so sad in today's world how people just nonchalantly believe in abortion, and they believe it's a blob of tissue. But if anybody's ever seen an ultrasound, they would know that it's life. And everybody knows that if there's a heartbeat, there's life.
The right to life is the right of all rights. Without the right to life, all other rights would be illusory. The right to own property, the right to travel, all of those would be superfluous to a corpse. The right to life is the foundation of all rights. And it is based upon the idea that God is the creator of us and created us in his image, and therefore we must respect the sanctity of individual human life, and that begins even in the womb when human life is created at the moment of conception. Especially in the womb where life is the most vulnerable, we must have protection. But the worldview that literally removes God as a foundation, as the creator, would ultimately look more at an evolutionary model in the example of God not being there. Now, I know some people may think that God created through evolution. We're not going to talk about theistic evolution. We're going to be talking about the difference between God and not God. And when God is not in the picture, when there is no God, there is no ultimate creation or establishments of rights and liberties. Therefore, there is an evolution of not only individuals, but there's an evolution of ideas, and there's an evolution of laws. There is, as Charles Darwin posited, the survival of the fittest. If you look at Charles Darwin's understanding of evolution, The Origin of Species, in his book, his subtitle says it very well, where he talks about the survival of the fittest, where you have the weaker overcome by the stronger. And in that model of an evolutionary or atheistic model, there is no ultimate right to life. Consequently, one person can take the life of another individual. And consequently, abortion is permissible, even despite the scientific evidence that life begins at the moment of conception, that it is a unique individual created human being. But in a Judeo-Christian worldview where God is the creator and the author of life, then all life from conception through natural death should be protected and respected.
I marvel at some who say they're believers and somehow suggest that supporting abortion on demand is something that's consistent with the Scriptures. If God is anything, he is the God of life. We're all made in his image. And so whether you're a Down syndrome baby or a 90-year-old sinking into dementia, you have dignity and value and worth. Our faith teaches us that human life should be protected at all costs. And so a Christian that seriously delves into the Scripture, in my view, has to be pro-life at the beginning of life, all the way through its natural course to the natural end of life.
Well, it doesn't get clearer than thou shalt not murder. And when we think about all the way through the Scripture where the Lord defined life, he showed us life in the womb. He told us about life in the womb. He told us that he speaks to man, that even before we were thought about, that he had plans for us to give us a future and a hope. He told us that we were uniquely created in the womb. He had the babe leap in Mary's womb when she saw her cousin in the womb. And the stories are long. We know exactly what God thinks about abortion. It's one of the reasons that we have the problems that we do in our society today, is that we are just having this horrible crime against humanity every single day. I myself bought that lie of the left, that there's nothing wrong with killing your offspring. And it wasn't until the fourth time that I went into one of their so-called safe, legal, rare clinics that I had a gut instinct way down deep inside that there must be something wrong with it. I didn't abort again. I got saved after, and it was years later that I understood just how unique these beings are that are developing in the womb, and the responsibility that God has given to potential mothers to hold that sacred DNA, if you will, and the opportunity for someone to create now a new human being, and that human being then having the responsibilities that we on this side of the womb have. So abortion is something that I think drives, in fact, I know for a fact abortion is driving all of the discussions in this country because it may be legal, but it's unlawful in God's eyes, and He's judging us accordingly.
And not only does common sense and revealed law, but certainly science inform us that life begins at the moment of conception. Therefore, abortion is the taking of innocent human life, and contrary to the laws of nature and of nature's God. The subject of marriage is also critical to worldviews. If we look at the creation, fall, redemption model, God created Adam and Eve in His image as the highest created order. Out of all the other things created in the universe, out of all the other things in our created world, as magnificent and as splendid as they are, nothing ranks to the level of humanity created in the image of God. While God created and all was good, He created man and woman in His image, in the image of God, unique from anything else that's created. Not only did He create man and woman, Adam and Eve, male and female, in His image, but He brought them together as husband and wives, as man and woman, as the first family, the very first cell of society.
There is a Christian worldview when it comes to marriage, and I think it has shaped our customs and our culture in America and in Western civilization. And that Christian worldview says that there is only one natural marriage, and that is a marriage between a man and a woman. And that is that we have a job in living our lives as Christians here in America to do one thing through marriage, and that is to procreate, to in fact create in God's image babies, boys and girls, and then to bring them up in God's way and in accordance with God's law. I don't think that you can have it any other way.
But look, you can't read the Bible and not know that marriage is between a man and a woman. There's all kinds of statistical research arguments you can make about the outcomes you get for children when they've got mothers and fathers. But from a pure scriptural standpoint, God's institution of marriage between a man and a woman was a God-created institution meant to have to create the circumstances where the human race, men and women, would have the greatest opportunity for happiness and be most effectively able to bring children into the world and raise those children to be good and godly citizens.
And as the scriptures say, both in the Old and the New Testament, there is a unitive component to men and women joining together as one in marriage. There is the unitive component where they become one flesh, as the scriptures say. And from that creation of one flesh through marriage, they procreate another individual human being who also is of the highest created order in the very image of God. So, in the very creation motif of a Judeo-Christian worldview, marriage is fundamental. It is part of God's natural created order. It's as much as part of God's natural created order as the sun and the moon, the stars, the oceans, the plants and animals, as part of God's created world and the order within the universe. God created male and female as distinct human beings, where the sexes are complementary to one another. And coming together, they complement the male and the female and come together as one flesh. And as a result of that, procreate another human being. It is in the marriage relationship that children are born, that the future generation is born, and in that marital relationship of husbands and wives, moms and dads, That is the best environment for raising children.
Well, there's absolutely a Christian view of marriage. When you think about marriage, God defined marriage in Genesis. And when Jesus was approached with the question of marriage, he reached into Genesis and defined marriage once again. You know, you hear some from the homosexual community that will say that Jesus never spoke against homosexuality. Well, he didn't need to, in that he defined marriage and he talked about the parameters around our sexuality. And we know that they were in that covenant that was established in Genesis, that for this reason a man leaves his father and his mother and he cleaves to a wife, and the two then become one. And that is the story of creation. What we find with the homosexual movement is this gender binary that encourages them to think that all of us are the same, that there's nothing different between the genders. And in believing that, what they've done is they've dismissed that God is a creator and created, and that we are examples of that.
This entire debate that we're having throughout the United States and the world about same-sex marriage is literally about the abolition of marriage and the abolition of the idea of gender. Gender does make a distinction and a difference to the well-being of individuals, and especially to the well-being of children. Same-sex marriage, as a policy matter, says that children don't need moms, or they don't need dads. They're irrelevant to the well-being of children. That two moms or two dads are just as good and equivalent of a mom and a dad household. We know from common sense and sociological studies that that is simply wrong. We also know that it is contrary to God's natural created order in creation, where he created Adam and Eve, male and female, in his image, from which a new life is created and in which those children are raised understanding the complementary nature of men and women. The Judeo-Christian worldview also, as it relates to marriage, not only has a unitive and a creative component, but it also has a spiritual component. For example, in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, it speaks about husbands and wives and their relationship to one another. And it says that husbands ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. You think that the whole passage is speaking about marriage, but it actually says, I speak of a great mystery, because what I'm speaking about is Christ and his relationship to his church. Marriage helps us to understand who God is. It helps us to understand the love of God revealed in Christ Jesus. You cannot just simply reconstruct God's natural created order of marriage to be two people of the same sex without having consequences. To do so has a consequence not only to future creation of future offspring, but the well-being of children, and it also has an impact on religious freedom. Why? Because it's an attack on God's natural created order. It is just as much an attack on God's natural created order as an attempt to try to change gravity. You may not like it, but there's no way you can change it. And you disobey the laws of gravity at your own consequence. Some people may want to change marriage, but if they do, there are consequences not only to individuals who participate in same-sex activities, but to society as a whole. Marriage is part of God's natural created order. In a Judeo-Christian or Christian worldview, informs us as to the importance of marriage as the union of a man and a woman. In discussing the importance of a Christian worldview, let's consider three things: the family, the church, and the government. We've talked before in this program with respect to the division of powers that the Constitution establishes between the three branches of government and between the federal and the state governments as well. But within a Christian worldview, you have three spheres, if you will. And these are important to whether you're talking about laws and policies at the local, state, or federal level. And these spheres operate sovereignly, or to some extent independently, or if one of those spheres interferes in the other sphere is when you have problems. The very first sphere of government is a family. Husband and wife, mom and dad with the family. That is the first cell of government, the first foundation of government. If the family is weak or weakened, if the family structure falls apart, it ultimately affects society. Strong families mean a strong civil body politic or a strong government. If you weaken family through divorce or disintegration, you ultimately do several things. Obviously, you destabilize not only the family, but it has consequences for the government and the society around you. It has consequences economically. It has consequences educationally, emotionally, spiritually, and in every other way, particularly with regards to crime. Destabilizing the family is critical to everything else because it is the foundation pillar. The family must be respected and protected. The rights of parents must be respected as the head of the family. The family is the first sphere of sovereignty. The next is the church. The church has its role and its place. And if the church interferes too much with the family, sometimes it can overpower and overtake and consume the time or the involvement or function of the family. The church is the body of people that we have the opportunity to fellowship with and worship our Creator. The church has to be respected and protected, especially from the government, the third sphere. The third sphere is the government or the civil body politic, whether at local, state, or national level. And that government must respect the sovereignty of the church and respect the sovereignty of the family. We get into problems whenever the government intrudes into one of those two spheres. When it intrudes, for example, into the religious liberty of the church, when it tries to tell a church who it can or cannot hire or fire, when it tries to dictate to churches what it can or cannot do with regards to doctrine or other religious free exercise. That's when the government intrudes onto the sovereignty of the family. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor the free exercise thereof. It cannot prohibit the free exercise of individuals, particularly within the states. And each state has its own equivalent First Amendment, if you will, protecting the free exercise of religion and prohibiting the establishment of religion. That is designed to make sure that government does not step out of its role and intrude into the operation of the church. Nor should government step out of its role and become the nanny state and intrude into the sovereignty of the sphere of the family. A Christian or Judeo-Christian worldview includes these three cells, or these three roles of jurisdiction, if you will: the family, the church, and the government. The importance of a Christian worldview is significant in our laws and policy. In summary, a Christian or Judeo-Christian worldview has as part of its foundation three primary areas of observation or grounding: creation, the fall, and redemption. I encourage you to read more about this, and as you're thinking about why you make certain decisions or why certain laws should be this way or that way, think about them in terms of Christian worldview. What does your Christian or Judeo-Christian worldview have to say towards those laws and policy? How do they inform you as these laws and policies are enacted? Are they in conformity or are they out of step with this worldview of creation, fall, and redemption?